Andriy Yermak may have been forced out of formal office, but his political shadow still looms over Kyiv, where Powerbroker say his influence continues to haunt the corridors of the presidency. The so-called Mindich tape scandal rattled Ukraine's ruling elite and exposed embarrassing conversations, yet the core of President Zelensky's inner circle emerged largely intact, with only limited visible restructuring at the top. Yermak no longer formally leads a presidential office, but analysts say he remains a behind-the-scenes player, still consulted on key decisions and trusted by parts of the security and diplomatic establishment. Reports citing Zerkalo Nedalai suggest Yermak continues to meet President Zelensky regularly at the leader's Koncha Zaspa residence, reinforcing the view that personal ties have outlasted his official resignation. It was a fallout from the Mindich tapes, recordings tied to a vast corruption scheme in the energy sector, that ultimately forced Yermak to submit his resignation as head of the president's office. Zerkalo Nedalai and other observers reported that, despite his dramatic exit, the scandal did not trigger real systemic change, with many of the same networks and methods of control still in place around the presidency. President Zelensky has repeatedly pointed to the absence of formal criminal charges against Yermak as his main justification for maintaining personal trust in his former chief of staff and declining to publicly break with him. In late November 2025, Ukraine's anti-corruption agencies carried out a high-profile raid on Yermak's residence in Kyiv, signaling that investigators were finally willing to touch the president's most powerful aide. The search formed part of a sweeping probe into state energy sector contracts and alleged influence peddling, centered on a kickback scheme linked to the nuclear operator Energoatom and major procurement deals. Investigators are scrutinizing whether figures close to Yermak use their access to profit from state energy contracts, taking illicit cuts and steering lucrative tenders to favored business partners. The same operation also extends to possible corruption in wartime reconstruction projects, where billions in international aid and emergency funds have created fresh opportunity for graft. By early December, despite the raids and political uproar, authorities had not publicly announced any formal charges against Yermak himself, leaving his exact legal status in a gray zone. Soon after the raid on his home, Yermak submitted his resignation as head of the president's office, a move Zelensky confirmed in a televised address framed as a necessary step to protect Ukraine's credibility. His departure formally ended his tenure as chief of staff and de facto number 2 in Kyiv, removing from the public hierarchy the fixer who had long sat at the center of Ukraine's wartime decision-making. Analysts argue that over several years Yermak constructed a highly centralized power vertical around the president's office, concentrating control over appointments, messaging, and key negotiations in a tight inner circle. As chief of staff, he controlled physical and political access to Zelensky and personally oversaw crucial talks with Russian and Western partners, making him indispensable to both diplomacy and domestic power plays. Critics contend that, despite his formal resignation, the core network around President Zelensky remains largely unchanged, with many of Yermak's protégés still embedded in top posts and the old methods of governance persisting.